John, we gather here today to mourn the loss of the 2022 Mets, who are done.
Yeah, we were both there for the end, and I would say it was stunning and it was abrupt.
Yeah, we'll give our opinion on how it ends, what they should do in the future, and we'll be joined by Theo Epstein to talk all the new rules for 2023 on the show with Joel Sherman and John Heyman. So, John, I think we came here today thinking we'd be talking about the Mets one way or the other, and we're talking about them in the other way, which is they did not survive the first round after winning 101 games this season. I think a lot of this was about not beating out the Braves, right? The previous weekend, they played 7 games against the Braves from the end of August to the end of the season. They needed to win twice in those 7 games. They only won once. It made them vulnerable to have to play the wild card. So as we sit here today, John, what do you think about the end game with the Mets?
Yeah, I mean, 101 wins is a lot of wins, and that was kind of an abrupt ending. I've been in clubhouses before that seemed devastated. Now, I know they get a cooling off period. We weren't in there for probably the first 15 minutes. They almost seemed resigned to it. To me, I think they knew what was ahead, and the situation that they were in with their starting pitchers seeming diminished generally. Bassett, great throughout the year, really not good in the last couple starts. Scherzer, fantastic throughout the year, not good the last couple starts. deGrom, not perfect, gutsy performance, but and also the Dodgers coming up, best team in baseball, followed by likely the Braves. It was going to be a gauntlet, and it's going to be very difficult the way they were playing. So, it was a great regular season, but certainly ended very poorly. They needed to win one game in Atlanta. They had the pitching set up, just one game, and they couldn't do it.
Yeah, John, it reminded me a little bit of a team we're both familiar with, which was Buck Showalter's first playoff team, the 1995 Yankees, in that it was built around David Cone and Jack McDowell. And McDowell got hurt and wasn't himself late in the year, and Cone essentially, even if they had advanced, I think they knew he was pretty much shot. Remember, he ended up with an aneurysm the next year after throwing 147 pitches in Game 5. They just essentially ran out of starting pitching, and then their season ended against Seattle. I guess we have to turn the page now. There's going to be a lot of big questions this offseason about the Mets. They have more big free agents than any team. Everyone should go get the New York Post today. John wrote a great column about Jacob deGrom and how he would handle it in the future. Among the free agents, he feels like the most important because he's the most important to the fans, a homegrown guy. Why don't you say what you think the Mets should do with him? And if you want to go into some of the other free agents, go for it.
Yeah, unlike with Judge, which I had told the Yankees they got to pay him whatever he wants, and I was told, of course, I will never have a job with the Yankees after telling them that. I think they need to set limit with deGrom. I mean, he's obviously a fantastic talent, one of the greatest pitching talents ever. It's been a pleasure watching him perform on the mound. But realistically, I mean, I would weigh the dependability versus the dollars. I would look at it like, he's threw 64 innings in the regular season this year and made over $30 million. Yet, and I understand he's going to get more on the open market, so he will opt out. He's got $30 million to go with the Mets. There is a team option also, so he'll wipe all that out and be out on the open market, and he will do much better. So he was correct saying that, and I do think the Mets should increase their offer, but in my mind, they need to have a limit here because we've now been through a couple of years with him. He missed 13 straight months, so half of each season was lost. Even more than half of this season was lost, and realistically, we're talking about a 34-year-old at this point. I would offer a 2-year deal for $70 million with big incentives. I polled agents who think he's going to do much better than that, and God bless him. If he does, I would say let him go, and we'll work with what we have because I think dependability, and nothing against him, he's just injury prone at this point, at this stage in his career, 34 years old. To me, I would not go long for him, and I would not make him the highest paid player in baseball.
Yeah, John, they have many, for a team that won 101 games, has an owner willing to spend they feel to me like they have a lot of issues going into this offseason. And I think one of the issues we can't miss is the Atlanta Braves. the Braves, even in the last 48 hours, signed Spencer Strider long-term, right? They did it with Harris. They did it with Olsen. They did it with Riley. They've got Acuna and Albies. Like, we know what their core is moving forward, and it's a championship core. They won the championship last year. They've now won 5 straight NL East. The Mets should not punt, obviously. They've got to keep going for it. But it feels like so much – my thought watching them is so much went right this year. Like, they signed – 4 free agents and made a big trade for Bassett. They all worked.
Yeah.
Right?
I got Ottavino, too.
Yeah, Ottavino worked.
Make it 5.
Right? Their players had good years. Nimmo stayed healthier than he's really ever stayed. McNeil won a batting title. Diaz had the best relief season in their history. I don't know that they could get so much right next year. Plus, they have these big 4 free agents. It's not an easy. I think they're very good and they should go for it, but it's not an easy puzzle for them.
Yeah, I put the Braves aside. Just don't worry about them. You've got enough to worry. You got enough on your own plate. They have all these free agents. I've got 7. I think are key free agents, starting with deGrom, who, as we said, will opt out, and then you have. Obviously, they signed these great free agents. Some of them are on 2-year deals, so they'll have more questions the next year. This is a little bit of an older team. It's not the Cleveland Guardians, and that's why, again, I don't want to harp on this. That's why I said they needed to go for it at the deadline and not be so timid and go get some players. And they, like a lot of GMs, Billy Epler and company, they didn't do it. And they felt they were in good position. At the time they were, and unfortunately they came up 1 game short in the regular season, 1 game short against the Padres. Obviously, I think Steve Cohen is their top asset. He's willing to spend. He wants to win. He certainly has the money, probably willing to take a loss if he has to. So, I wouldn't be shy about spending generally, and I would certainly start by bringing back Nimmo if you can and Diaz. There are some reservations about it going along with a reliever and giving big money to a reliever. It's been very volatile historically. We saw Mariano Rivera. He's generally the exception, but I listed a number of them to a Mets executive yesterday, and he still said, oh, well, those are all Hall of Famers. I mean, Diaz, to me, was their MVP, so I don't see how you let him go. Nimmo has just improved markedly throughout his career. I mean, gets on base. He's become an excellent center fielder. So those are the 2 I'd start with to bring back. But, as you said, they went 5 for 5. You're probably not going to go 5 for 5 again, but they need to be big in the free agent market out of necessity in this case because they've got 7 guys that I counting Lugo and Ottavino, as well as Bassett, Walker, Diaz, Nimmo, and deGrom. That's a lot of players.
Among the people, I tell you this all the time, John, among the people who do what we do, I always think you have a feel for where the dollars are going better than most. And I wanna put you on the spot a little bit because we always hear teams will do with what's within reason. Throw that out. It's not going to be reasonable. Some team, like what the Colorado Rockies paid Chris Bryant last year, nobody else was going to get close to that. It was reasonable for them, but not anybody else. I asked you yesterday, how much do you think Brandon Nimmo is going to get in this free agent market? And I think when you say this number out loud in front of into a microphone, most of the people listening to this podcast might blink a little. What do you think Brandon Nimmo is going to get?
I mean, at this stage, I think he's probably going to get 7 for 150, maybe higher than that. Right. I mean, we saw what Ellsbury got. Obviously, that deal did not work.
And that's like a 10-year-old deal at this point, right?
Somewhat similar type players. So, I mean, we could be talking about a $200 million player. No one would have thought this going into the year, that we could be talking about close to $200 million. But I would say 7 for 150 for him, and I would go with Diaz. To me, got to give him the record deal at this point, right? Chapman's got the record, right? So I would say he should get 18 a year, so 5 for 90 for Diaz. And I think he comes back. I mean, Nimmo was wearing his uniform late. I don't know. Is that a sign that, this is
He said he was taking pictures on the field with his family.
Was he taking pictures of his last moment as a Met on the field? I don't know.
Would you do both of those deals? Like if you were, like Steve Cohen
I don't have his money.
But if Steve Cohen said, hey, what should we do this season? Would you go that high for Nimmo and that high for Diaz?
I've already let deGrom leave, so I would keep the 2 younger. But I have money left over. It's not my money once again, but I would keep those 2 guys, yes, Nimmo and Diaz.
Yeah, and so that means letting Bassett go. And I think we're looking at, as we kind of wrap up here, our opening segment is, think about it. They have Scherzer pitching at 39 next year. You don't know about that. We've never seen McGill and Peterson kind of get through full 162-game seasons. Walker's a free agent. Bassett's a free agent. deGrom's a free agent. They probably will pick up the option on Carrasco,
Sure.
right, and bring
Right.
him back. You're probably looking at getting a minimum 2 other starters, 3 other starters. That is not an easy thing, again, to go right, 2 for 2, 3 for 3 in starting pitching. What do you think about that?
Well, as you know, I would de-emphasize starting pitching and go to the bullpen. To get even a number 4 starter costs what, $12 million a year or $15 million a year, and I guess we're bringing Carrasco back at $14 million as your number 5 starter, right? So, to me, I would save the money there and keep it with your stars on your position player stars. Spend it on the bullpen and not have that 1-2 combination that you had, obviously, with deGrom leaving, and go a different route.
Well, the offseason came quicker for the Mets. We're going to have a real fascinating offseason to talk about them on the podcast. But next up on the show with Joel Sherman and John Heyman is Theo Epstein to talk about new rules and how he sees baseball as a general manager. Back on the show with Joel Sherman and John Heyman, and we're so pleased that we'll be joined here by Theo Epstein. We were debating your current title. Let's do the former stuff, right? 3-time champion general manager, ended the Hex in Boston, 86 years, ended the Hex with the Cubs, 108 years. A consultant for on-field matters, and we're certainly going to get into on-field matters because this will be the last postseason played with quote-unquote the old rules before we have some dramatic new rules. But I'm wondering, Theo, to open this, if I could have you just put your former GM hat on. We just had 4 teams eliminated from the playoffs. I bet you 3 of them, all but Tampa, St. Louis, Toronto, and especially the Mets, probably had grand plans about how far they were going to go this offseason. I just wonder, as an executive, how do you balance the misery of the immediacy of being eliminated and the thought of maybe overreacting? Hey, our plans were shattered. We're short of this, and still trying to look at it from 20,000 feet as you get into an off season and try to actually fix what's wrong with your club.
Yeah, it's really hard. First of all, thanks for having me on, guys. Good to be with you. It's really hard to balance, the emotion of the postseason with sort of the reality and the logic of the regular season. And I think you start by taking a little break, right? Like, yeah, and no good decisions are made in the immediate aftermath of getting knocked out of the playoffs, or probably of winning the World Series, right? It's just important, no matter what happens, to take some time, process it, deal with the emotion, get it out of your system, and then start a more clinical assessment of what's gone on. But even so, it can be difficult because even answering a question, like let's say you win 100+ games and you get knocked out in the first round. Someone asks you a question: was the season a success? Even that's a hard question to answer, right? You don't want to say yes, because the ultimate goal is to win the World Series, but then you're not doing the organization justice. So many things have to go right. So many people have to work incredibly hard. So many sacrifices have to be made in order to have an organization that can put forth a 100-win season, which are pretty rare. Not this year, but generally really rare. So you don't even. It's just hard to reconcile. The dichotomy of regular season success and postseason failure, even internally, let alone externally. When it comes to making adjustments to try to win the World Series, I think you have to start with the regular season. You can't win the World Series if you don't get there. But especially in this day and age, there are certain elements of a team that are crucial in the postseason. They don't guarantee success. Not having them doesn't guarantee that you won't succeed in the postseason, but you have to make sure you have those ingredients. And if you don't have them, that's what mid-season acquisitions can address as well.
I was going to go in a different direction, but since you talked here on Joel's question, I thought I would follow up a little bit. There's this theory that great starting pitching is really what helps make a great postseason team. And, I push back on that a lot because we saw the Braves with the best pitching in baseball for a decade win once. We saw the Phillies with the best rotation I've ever seen not win. They won when Cole Hamels was a starter. It was great. Obviously, I think Joe Blanton was either 2 or 3 at that point. What do you think the key is as you look at it now? You've taken a little bit of a step back, but you obviously were in it, helping end 3 jinxes. What is the key to the postseason success as opposed to the regular season?
Right. Well, I mean, I think we have to see how this format plays out. It's a little different. I think one thing that isn't an effective way to assess that is any type of anecdotal analysis, like you just said. Pick this team here. Well, they had this other team didn't have that. That doesn't work. I think it's important to sort of look at big samples, which is hard in postseason play because we're not dealing with a big enough sample. But look, typically in the postseason, you can identify things that don't matter as much, right? Like your fourth and fifth starter don't matter as much because the innings are going to be concentrated at the top of your rotation. The sort of the extreme depth of your bullpen doesn't matter as much. Your closer matters a lot more because he's going to be pitching more innings, a greater percentage of the innings. There's more off days in the postseason. Will be available more. Your ability to beat up bad pitching, that doesn't matter quite as much. You're going to be facing really good pitching, and you could say, and for a while there, contact hitting really mattered. But then you can contrast that with how effective home run hitting is in the postseason. I think it's like teams that out homer their opposition, or the last couple of years are winning close to 90% of the postseason games or something. So I think defense, if you look at a big sample and even smaller sample, really important. These games are close. When the ball is put in play, it's really important to convert those balls into outs. But I think we'll have to see how the latest format bears out, and then get as big a sample as you can and draw your conclusions. But I don't think there's any one formula, but certainly it's hard to win in the postseason if you don't hit home runs, if you don't have impact pitching that you can then put in a position to pitch a great majority of your innings, and I think a tight defense as well.
Theo, you mentioned the new playoff format a few times. That's this year. Next year, and you were very involved in this, we're going to have some seismic change to the game, some real impact with new rules. It will be too long to list it. Hopefully we could get through all the major ones here. So just as a way to open, I wonder, which one do you think has the greatest impact and why?
I think the pitch timer ultimately, it's going to, I think, have the greatest impact on the entertainment value of the game. And if you look at why, I think largely it's because it improves the game by giving fans more of what they like and less of what they don't like, and that's a very effective way to address fan concerns. And when you poll fans, and Major League Baseball has done a great job of that over the years through surveys and focus groups and online data gathering. Fans tell you their favorite events in the game are triples, doubles, stolen bases, great defensive plays, action, and they want as much of it as they can get. Ball and play, action. And fans' least favorite events are anything having to do with dead time, pitching changes, mound visits, things like that. And unfortunately, the game has evolved over the last couple of decades to a point where those ball and play action events occur on average about once every 4 minutes. So a fan has to sit there and wait 4 minutes just for simply a ball and play, even a routine play, but to get an action event. And a big part of that is just how much dead time there is between pitches. And so the pitch timer, while it may seem a foreign concept to most fans, you always hear a lot, and I used to say this too, one of the things you love about baseball is there's no clocks in the game. That's what makes it unique. The pitch timer, when we tested it, this version of the timer, when we tested it in the minor leagues, and talking about over 8,000 games, the equivalent of 3.5 major league seasons of testing. Once players adjust to it, it really does a good job of fading into the background and just creating this beautiful rhythm and pace to the game that's reminiscent of the way the game was played maybe 30, 40 years ago, where pitchers get the ball, get their sign and fire, hitters stay in the box and are ready to hit. And the result as fans is you don't notice the clock at all. All you notice is this great rhythm and more action, and it creates a more beautiful game. And as far as the play on the field, I think there's also, the data shows that there's a chance for a real positive impact there as well. Pitchers working at that crisp pace. So far, we've noticed have tended to throw a few more strikes. That way, hitters in the box have tended to make a little bit more contact with the pitch timer, whether that's because they're locked in by not stepping out of the box, or that hitters or pitchers can't throw quite as many max effort pitches because they don't have as much time to recover between at bats. Defense, I think, will be a little bit crisper. How many times have position players told you, I love playing behind a Mark Burley or someone who works really quick because they can stay locked in, as opposed to the pitchers that are taking 30 seconds between pitches. So, there's just a lot of encouraging signs. And I understand it's a massive adjustment. We want players to be able to have their routines, to perform at a high level without worrying about a pitch timer, without suffering violations. And I think again, after a brief adjustment period, which we saw in the minor leagues was really 2 to 3 weeks, I think players will be able to do that. There are a lot of safeguards built into the rule to ensure that violations don't occur, don't interfere with players' ability to perform at a high level. And that's what we saw in the minor leagues. After the first 3 weeks, on average, there was half a violation per game. That means each team was suffering the penalty, an automatic ball or an automatic strike, once every 4 games. And we made further adjustments to the rules to provide for the differences between the big leagues and the minor leagues. So we're hopeful that the players will be able to make a smooth adjustment, play their game the way they want to play it without thinking about the pitch timer, and just have a better pace, better product on the field for fans to enjoy. And it's going to impact every pitch. So I think that's the biggest impact, and also the one we're most excited about, even as we know there will be some adjustment period in April.
John, just so the fans know, it's 15 seconds with nobody on base. The pitcher has to be in his motion, and 20 seconds with somebody on base. Correct?
Correct. Yeah, and the hitter also has to be in the box and attentive to the pitcher with 8 seconds remaining on the clock. So it's not just a rule to affect pitcher behavior, but also hitter behavior, and make sure that both sides of the encounter are ready to go at a crisp pace.
Yeah, I wanted to personally thank you for the pitch timer. I guess we call it a pitch timer, not a pitch clock. I just endured a 4-hour, 20-minute game that was, I think, 9 runs were scored in the game, and it was frankly way too long. So I appreciate that. The experimentation went really well in the minor leagues when it was 14 and 19. I know you dealt with the union and a few players who represented all the players, and they picked some very reasonable guys, Tyler Glasnow and Whit Merrifield and some others. I'm wondering why you guys could do whatever you wanted. That was kind of the rule. You could have made it 14 and 19. Why did you exceed to 15 and 20 seconds instead of 14, 19? And what did you sense was the push? And the players didn't vote yes, even though they had reasonable representatives. They all voted against, even though their vote didn't really count in the end. Why do you think they voted against? And where did you sense the pushback came from? On the shift, on the pitch clock, from batters, from pitchers on the pitch clock? I mean, you could do what you wanted to do, but you did make concessions. So talk about the concessions and where the pushback came from.
Yeah, well, there's a lot in that question. I guess I'll start with the headline, which is the one of the most important developments out of the last CBA was the establishment of this joint competition committee for the first time in baseball, mirroring what we've seen in other sports that have, I think, more effectively than baseball, made appropriate and timely rule changes to make sure that the product on the field is the best it can possibly be, as entertaining as possible, giving fans more of what they want, less of what they don't want, put the players in the middle of the action, et cetera. And so that committee was established in this CBA, and As you mentioned, there are 4 player representatives. There are 6 owner representatives, and there's an umpire representative as well. And the whole point was to be as collaborative as possible. And I think it's a recognition of the fact that to get rule changes right, you should want and need the input of players on the field. They're the ones closest to the action. They're the ones most impacted by the rules of the game, and any rule changes. The game is about the players. It's for the fans, but it's about the players. So of course, you need player input in order to get the rule changes right. And despite the fact that the players ultimately voted against the pitch timer, which I'll get to in a second, which I completely understand, there was significant collaboration on the Joint Competition Committee. John Stanton, the owner of the Mariners, chairs the committee. The commissioner asked him to run it in a collaborative way. He bent over backwards to do so. He was always available for the players. We had countless Zoom meetings and great discussions. And the bottom line is those discussions, the player feedback, and it wasn't just those 4 players. They went to the player reps, who went to all the players in the big leagues to get their opinions, and then it came back to the committee. The player input did improve the rule and did affect the rule. So, John, you made reference to granting the additional second. So we did it. The minor league testing was 14 and 19. We went to 15 and 20. Also went from 9 seconds for the batters to be attentive to 8 seconds. There were further changes as well. The disengagement limit on pitchers, which we can get into later if you want, that was changed and now reset when a runner advances. We added an additional mound visit for the 9th inning to ensure that was available in close and late situations, a way to reset the clock. We made sure that umpires had special discretion to reset the timer when appropriate. So, all those changes were a result of player feedback and were designed to make sure that in the big leagues, with the third deck, in games that matter a lot, in late and close situations, the timer is not a major actor in the game. You don't want the timer to be a character. You want the players to be the protagonists. And so, even though they didn't ultimately vote for the timer, they improved the rule, and I thought that was a big victory. Now, why not vote for it? Well, I think a couple of reasons. One, and I think let me start by this: the players were hugely helpful, and they want the best version of the game too. They care about the game as much as anybody. They want to grow the game. They want the fans to be happy. So they were in this for the right reasons. I think they really do want changes that improve the game. But first of all, when you're a successful veteran big league player, by definition, you're the best at the world under the current conditions, right? So you've made your living, you're helping your organization win by playing under the current rules. So any change to the rules would be a bigger intrusion on a player and is more foreign to a player than it would be on me sitting in a boardroom. I don't have to go and play under a new set of conditions in order to make a living, in order to help my organization. 2 is, I know we talk about the players like this, the players don't like that. Players aren't monolithic. It's a very diverse and large body of players that make up the union. You have pitchers, you have position players, you have rookies, you have veterans, you have players who've experienced the timer in the minor leagues, you have those who've never seen a game with the timer, and a whole different players who work fast, players who work slowly, players with intricate routines, players who don't have much of a routine. So in the end, I think it was always going to be hard to get any diverse body to a point where there's consensus on any one rule that has so many different variables in it. So again, I think it's understandable. I think there was tremendous cooperation and collaboration, and the players really improved all these rules, even if they didn't ultimately vote for some of them.
Theo, I wonder if anything talks to whatever that term analytics means or modernity does, more than the growing shift over the years. You guys decided there were 2 potentials, right? Put everyone's feet on the infield dirt, or make sure there's 2 guys on both sides of the bag in the infield. You went for both. Why did you do that? And are you concerned at all about unintended consequences, that if you open up right field again, you are going to get the kind of pull the ball, just go for homer, the antithesis of what you've talked about in a lot of your answers, which is action, run, etc.
Yeah. The shift issue is the one of all the rule changes where the data was the least clear, and where there's, I think, the greatest risk of unintended consequences, and where there's strong arguments on both sides. I think you mentioned the most compelling argument against change, which is that banning the shift does benefit a certain subsection of hitters, mainly 3 true outcome type left-handed hitters who are pull heavy, who don't align with the broader goals of increasing the amount of balls in play and athleticism on the field. There's also counter arguments just based on precedent and competitive philosophy that teams should have the right to position fielders wherever they like. We certainly heard that from GMs and managers. And then you mentioned another reason, another strong argument, which is it's really hard to foresee the downstream impacts of the shift rule. The game on the field is a set of behaviors based on incentives. When you change the incentives, you change the behaviors. There are adjustments made back and forth. It's hard to see exactly how this one will play out. And then, last but not least, I think the other argument is that the shift itself, while it does annoy a lot of people in the game, a lot of fans, we can get into this why they don't like it. It's not the root cause of the negative trends in the game, right? It's not, the shift isn't the reason by itself that the league is hitting 243. That has a lot more to do with pitcher dominance, and the shift doesn't really do anything to address that. So those are, I think, the arguments against doing something. But I think, in the big picture, the arguments for some change and for legislating the shift are more compelling under the current circumstances. And we got into it a little bit, but look, fans, this is about the fans, right? Ultimately, and fans grew up knowing where the shortstop and the second baseman would be intuitively when they watch a game. Fans know what a hit should look like off the bat when they're watching the game, and we heard that from fans that they, when there's no shift out there, the game is more relatable. It restores this aesthetic that's more traditional throughout the history of the game. So that's one strong argument, is that obviously fans aren't monolithic either. There's opinions on both sides, but a lot of fans like the more traditional aesthetic. The second, and this is one that I hadn't thought about a lot until we tested the anti-shift legislation and saw it in action, is that shift restrictions really do bring back the premium on athleticism for defensive infielders. When you're shifted, fielders tend to get bunched up on one side of the field. You can get away with less athletic players. We saw a lot of, sort of slower moving, less athletic third baseman signed to play second base, with the thought process that you just stick him in the shift and they wouldn't get exposed. And with the shift, with the shift restrictions, infielders have a lot of room to roam. They can make plays at the extremity of their range. We found that, anecdotally, the amount of diving plays where players leave their feet, have to make that play at the end of their range, that goes up. And infielders love playing with the shift restrictions because it puts them in a position to make plays. And that gets to the next point, which I think is also compelling, which is that restricting the shift, I think, puts the game more back in the players' hands. It returns the game to the players. In other words, games will be decided more by whether the second baseman can, range into the hole, dive, pop up, make the Roberto Alomar play, throw him out at first base. That's a do or die play with the game on the line, instead of, did the front office have the perfect algorithm to position, his defense exactly where the ball is going to be hit. So I think generally rule changes that put the players in the middle of the action, that help players rely on their athleticism, also their instincts, where they can start positioning themselves a little bit more. Those are good for the game, especially with recent trends, the way the game's been heading, where the front office is having more and more of an impact in the game, actually on the field, as opposed to putting the teams together. And then last, I think it will impact the ball and play environment. And look, when the league's hitting 243, I think anything that you can do to make the in-play environment a little bit easier on hitters, even if it's mainly a subset of hitters, like shift restrictions are going to benefit left-handed hitters way more than right-handed hitters. But it'll help. It'll help open up some holes on the field. And we've also seen that just generally a non-shifted environment encourages a few more balls in play for whatever reason. When you adjust for the batter and the pitcher and the context, walk rate and strikeout rates are a little bit lower in non-shifted at bats than they are in shifted at bats. So all in all, it's a close call. Arguments on both sides, but given what we've seen, given how prevalent the shift is, given how extreme it's getting, how big a part of the game it's been, and how hard it is to hit right now, I think bringing it back is worth trying. And no one's saying that we're getting it exactly right. I think seeing how it plays out, knowing that there's a really low percentage that we got the perfect rule precisely right the first time. We'll make adjustments as we go. It was the same thing with instant replay. It's good to lean in and try new things to make the game better and be humble about it, knowing that things will come up you didn't anticipate and you can make adjustments along the way.
This may be a quick, easy one, but I frankly don't know the answer to it, so I thought I would ask. As someone who spent a long time trying to use the rules to your advantage, is there anything that prevents, we can't obviously need two guys on either side of second base. What's to prevent a shortstop who's barely to the left of second base from starting to move over to the other side of second base as the pitcher goes in his windup, or even sprinting over to right field? And also, what's to prevent, I don't think there's anything to prevent this, but maybe it's just not a good idea, a left fielder from being shifted over into short right field to, in effect, have a shift against those big left-handed hitters?
Yeah, well, as the rules currently constructed, nothing is to prevent your second point except the risks associated with it. So in other words, if you take your left fielder and you position him where the traditional shifted infielder is in short right field, now you're essentially playing with two outfielders. And so, yeah, you're going to prevent a few more pulled singles through the right side, but now you're covering the entire outfield with two players, and you're going to very, very likely create more doubles and triples and hurt your team more than you help them, except in extreme situations. You have maybe an extreme ground ball pitcher on the mound, left-handed hitter who hits the ball on the ground a lot. Maybe you could consider it under certain game situations, but I think there's, we may see that. I think and you can always adjust the rule to prevent it if it becomes popular. I think covering an entire major league outfielder with two outfielders is going to be risky. And then to your first question about what's to prevent a shortstop from moving, it's a question of degree and rule interpretation and umpire judgment. So fielders should have and need the ability to lean and to anticipate where the ball is going to be hit and to get a great jump. And nothing in the rule is intended to prevent fielders from doing that. But there's also language in the rule that allows umpires the ability to prevent circumvention of the rule. And I think even the rule lists the example of, a fielder running to time his way in a full sprint to get to the other side of the field. That would be deemed a circumvention of the rule. There's going to be a long period of umpire training and feedback and interpretation as you prepare for spring training. But umpires are called on to make sure the rule isn't circumvented in that manner.
Theo, you mentioned a few times pitcher dominance, 243 batting average. These rules, I actually like all your rules you're implementing, but in the end, if we do not do something to try to take some of the velocity, especially out of the game, is that limiting the number of pitchers available to use every game, or pitching changes, or moving the mound back? I just wonder, I know you've done a lot, but you personally have been involved in this. Are we doing enough if we do not do something to try to impact velocity in the game?
No, I think, I don't think anyone is looking at these three rule changes and the bigger basis too, which we didn't talk about yet, but in saying we're done and then this solves all the problems. Yeah, I think the single biggest concern in the game that affects the style of play is the strikeout rate and pitcher dominance. And we're in an era where pitchers have never had more at their disposal in terms of data and technology and modern training, and they're using it incredibly well. And I don't mean to, I'm not at all disparaging pitchers. I'm in awe of how good pitchers are, how hard they've worked, how they've really worked to take advantage of some of these breakthroughs and everything that's available to them to to increase velocity, to get in a pitch lab and design breaking balls that are completely optimized. Pitchers are throwing fewer and fewer fastballs, more and more wipe out breaking balls. They're training specifically for velocity. They're adjusting pitch grips to get the absolute most out of their full arsenal. They're just taking advantage of everything at their disposal, working incredibly hard and taking pitching to heights that we've never seen before. And at the same time, as all this is available to pitchers more than ever has been available to them in the past, less is being asked of them. When if you go back a generation and you said, what you asked a starting pitcher, what's your job? The answer, and everyone on the team and in the organization knew this, was to get as deep in the game as possible, hand the ball to the catcher if you could. If not, get into the ninth, get into the eighth, certainly get into the seventh, and eat up those innings. You have 1,400 innings over the course of a season. They have to come from somewhere. So starting pitchers looked at volume and bulk as a big part of their job. And now, because of modern pitcher usage and roster construction and the way pitching has evolved, I'd argue that the job of the starting pitcher, if we're being honest in the game today, is different. It's not go deep in the game anymore. It's miss as many bats as you can, and throw max effort as long as you can. And managers have told pitchers this: miss as many bats as you can, punch out as many guys as you can, and don't, we'll come get the ball from you. If that's the fifth inning, it's the fifth inning. And we have, under modern bullpen construction, we have 8 guys behind you in the bullpen who also throw in the upper 90s and can come in and dominate behind you. So that's a huge change in the game. We went from starting pitchers who have to concern themselves not just with effectiveness, but also with quantity. And so that means they pace themselves. Pitching used to be not quite as much a power display and was a little bit more of an art. There was, pitching to contact was a real thing because it helped you be more efficient and get deep in the game. You got to a certain point in the game, a first pitch sinker down the middle, knowing it was going to be put in play, was a good pitch, because there was a chance that, it's a ground ball to shortstop and you save your pitch count and you get deeper in the game. Now, a little bit less of an art, a little bit more of a science, and it's the science of bat missing and dominance. So, I think that's a big concern. It's not going anywhere. Pitchers just getting better and better, and pitchers have this inherent advantage compared to hitters when it comes to using modernism and data and technology, because pitching is inherently proactive. You dictate the action. You can decide what you're going to throw, when you're going to throw it, how you're going to throw it. You can train for the moment. Hitting is by definition a little bit more reactive. So it's not as if hitters can't use technology and data to improve, and they have, but it's just not quite as effective as pitching. I think that's why we've seen the scales tilt a little bit. So you're right. I think it's something we think about every day, which is, without disturbing the essence of baseball, how can you restore a little bit of equilibrium so that the league strikeout rate isn't higher than Bob Gibson, so that the league batting average isn't the lowest it's ever been. 243 is actually the lowest in the history of baseball if you adjust for pitchers not hitting anymore. So like in 1968, the year the non-pitchers hit 245. This year, non-pitchers hit 243. So it's the lowest it's ever been. I think inarguably it's a better game when the league hits closer to 270 or 265 than to 240. So what to do about it? You mentioned limiting the amount of pitchers on the roster. That's something that has already gone into effect, to a small extent. The rule now is 13 pitchers. And, we remember when we were growing up, there were 10 and then 11 pitchers on a staff. It's grown, then to 12, then to 13, and it got to a point where sort of 14 was average. And so this rule reins it in a little bit back to 13. You could make an argument that it would be a smart thing to consider gradually over time with advanced notice to clubs and to the industry, so that we could adjust and start drafting and developing starting pitchers again, and putting that emphasis back on efficiency and volume, not just on bat missing and dominance, to over time consider ramping it down. You could make an argument that, within 5 to 10 years, we should ramp it down below 13 to 12, maybe to 11, and what that would do, it would probably bring back, especially if it was done in conjunction with the double hook, where, you reward teams for getting more innings out of their starting pitcher by keeping the DH in the game, or some mechanism like that prevents teams from just going to 3 inning pitchers. But actually putting a premium on the starting pitcher going deep in the game. It would bring back a little bit of the art of pitching, because efficiency would be valued again by managers, by general managers, because you need to get those 1,400 innings from fewer pitchers. And so you'd have fewer max effort pitches thrown. You'd see pitching to contact come back a little bit. You'd see a bit more east-west pitching instead of this north-south bat missing all the time. But it's a complicated issue. And I think players and organizations would need time to adjust. So it would have to be studied, and it's being studied, and have to be done the right way. Other potential changes, there was a strong cry to consider moving the mound back as a way to restore that equilibrium between batters and pitchers, is sort of a way of effectively reining in velocity by giving the hitter more reaction time. And one attractive thing about that type of rule change is, if it worked, it might sort of fix everything with the strikeout rate, and you don't have to do 4 or 5 or 6 other rule changes. So we did test it out in the Atlantic League a couple of years ago. It proved to be a difficult rule to experiment with in the minor leagues, because it fundamentally impacts pitchers trying to make a living, and hitters too. The results, so it was a big burden on players, and we appreciated their cooperation. Try to make the rule change experiments as sort of convenient as possible for players. That one was a little difficult, and the results weren't great. The strikeout rate actually went up with the testing. I think again, unintended consequences. That's why you test these things. But breaking balls are a little bit tougher to handle when you have that extra distance. They break a little bit more, different angles into the strike zone. The adjustment factor is huge for hitters. You spend your whole life with 60 feet 6 inches, and disrupting the timing when it's a little bit greater distance was difficult. So it doesn't mean that that's not something to consider if it can be done in a way that protects players and you factor in player safety. So we're continuing to study increased mound distance, but in a laboratory setting, but studying it as something to keep in mind, and a possible way to restore the equilibrium. In addition to asking more of pitchers, or creating an environment where pitchers can't throw max effort quite as much, which I think is important to consider for the long run. There's also potentially ways to help hitters, is another way to do it. And so something that we're also studying, in a laboratory setting is, can you create a better visual environment for hitters? If you had, I'm just picking one example, but if you had like darker markings on the baseball, would it be on both sides of the ball? Would it be easier for hitters to pick up? And would you if you had better lighting, better hitters backgrounds, any small thing that you can do to help hitters in this environment where pitching is so good and so dominant? So those are the two ways, I think, to ultimately get to the problem, is rein in pitching a little bit. And there are different ways to do that, but generally placing more of a a premium on volume. So there's fewer max effort pitches thrown. By the way, I think the pitch clock will do that too. It's harder to throw max effort when you're throwing every 15 seconds. And then, so ways to rein in pitching, put a little bit of drag on pitching, and then ways to help hitters and put hitters in a position to succeed a little bit more than they are now.
Last one from me. I'm going to change the subject a bit. You were a general manager for a long time, and you were very bold as a general manager. You made a lot of great trades, but you certainly did take chances. Obviously, that trade with the White Sox, we gave up Dylan Cease, but you made so many great trades and resulted in, as I said, 3 championships. Nowadays, it seems like the GMs are much more timid. The ones who did take chances, E.J. Preller, the most extreme example, they're still around. Jerry Dipoto made that trade for Castillo. Click with Houston. They already had a great team anyway. They were going to still be alive anyway, but they made some good trades. But it seems like we see a lot more timidity among general managers. What do you think the reason for that is now?
I don't think it's fair of me in this position now to judge on the spectrum of courageous to timid where where GMs are. I'll say this though. I think we were talking about rule changes. There haven't been a lot of rule changes the last 20 years or so, and there's been a lot of new technology. There's been a lot of capturing of new data streams, and there's been a lot of application of those data streams, both on the field with the way players play and also in front offices with the way teams are put together. So I think that this generally static environment and a lot of the advancements and breakthroughs and learnings, which are now widespread throughout the game, have created more of a homogenous product. Like teams now look a lot alike. There are a lot of, most organizations sort of function with similar draft models, with similar development philosophies, with similar roster. Players are valued in a really similar way by a lot of general managers. And I think that has a cascading effect into the way the game looks on the field, is that, you don't necessarily have teams trying to do it different ways anymore. When we were growing up, you could look and, the Cardinals were 7 fast guys and Jack Clark, and because they played on an AstroTurf field, the rules were a little bit different for them. That really worked for them. The Dodgers, was pitching. The Orioles were, 3-run homer and great defense. You had your take and rake teams, you had your contact hitting teams, and it was just even hitters, like their stances. You saw different batting stances. Now everything on the field looks a little bit more similar. Teams are put together the same way. I think that's an argument for in favor of the rule changes, in favor of taking a few chances, because when you add something like a pitch timer, when you consider future changes to the game for the sake of putting the best version of the game on the field, what you're really talking about is disruption of some sort. You're taking the status quo, you're taking this relatively sort of homogenous game, and you're adding a significant disruption. And 30 organizations are going to react to that in their own way. There's going to be a change from taking the known competitive advantages that are out there and all these systems that are in place in front offices and organizations to take advantage of those competitive advantage. And now all of a sudden it's disrupted, and there's a hunt for new competitive advantages, new ways to go win baseball games, new ways to adjust to a pitch timer, new ways to put together those 1,400 innings that you need over the course of the season, and new way, the running game. We haven't talked about that, but as a consequence of the pitch timer and the disengagement limit and the bigger bases, to an extent, it's going to be a little bit easier to steal bases. So some teams might dive headlong into that and build their teams with faster, more athletic players. Other teams might ignore that and focus on other aspects of the game. So I think that's good for the game. I think it's going to increase diversity of approach with how you see the game played on the field, and also with how teams are put together. And therefore, to get back to a circuitous route back to your question, I think GMs will be more unique and will take more chances in an environment where there's more unknowns. and where there's more disruption. And I think that'll be good for the game. I look forward to seeing how GMs and organizations respond.
Theo, in our thing, we have a show timer, and it's running against us here. So we're not going to be able to get into the base stealing. It's a reason to already have you on again. So I just want to wrap up. You have these two positions now. You work for MLB. You work for Arctos, which I believe helps people get ownership groups together for sports teams. What do you clearly will know everything that's available one way or the other. What do you must be the most in-demand executive who's not working for a team right now. What does Theo Epstein want to do with his future?
Well, first of all, you should have put a talking timer on me, because that's my fault. I tend to talk in paragraphs.
It was pace of answer,
So I apologize for that. Feel free to edit it. Yeah, no, I mean, I love what I'm doing now. I've worked for teams for 30 years and loved it. Love the competition, love the camaraderie. Probably will do it again in some form or another eventually. But, taking a little break now while my kids are still young enough where they might want to hang out with me now and then. You guys know how quick it goes. It's a lot, when you're talking about 162 games and then plus 6 weeks in spring training, plus hopefully a month in the postseason. And then you have the off season. It doesn't leave a lot of time to structure your life the way you want to always be present for your kids and to live a good life. So taking a break for a few years has been great. Really enjoying that aspect of it. Really appreciate the seat at the table that the commissioner granted me to be part of this discussion about putting the best version of the game on the field and how to think through these rule changes. And then Arctos Sports Partners have been great, breaking new ground as institutional capital comes into sports franchise ownership. So I've said before, for a next and probably final chapter in baseball, it would be really rewarding, I think, to be part of an ownership group. I love the building process. I love, defining a set of values that you want to build your organization around. And I've seen great ownership and how that can make an impact on a city or region, and how great it is when you build something that leads to a winner and can help make a lot of people happy and do a lot of good in your community. So, the right time, the right group, the right situation, that's something I definitely entertain again. But for now, it's fun to think about, see the game through the fans' eyes and just try to, work with the commissioner and the players and the competition committee to put the best possible product we can on the field.
Well, Theo, thanks for all that. Thanks for all the insights about what's coming for next year and also insights into what your near future is. John and I appreciate you joining us on the show with Joel Sherman and John Heyman.
Thanks, guys. Good to be with you today.
John, Theo Epstein took us a lot of different places, so I'll ask the broad question. What stood out to you from what Theo Epstein talked to us about?
Well, we certainly got chapter and verse on the new rules, and I think overall they are terrific. I'm very happy about the pitch clock, or the pitch timer, as I've learned it's now called the pitch timer.
That's Orwellian of them.
Okay.
So that the
good.
pitchers don't feel bad about being told they're on a clock. It's a timer.
Yes.
Feels more pastoral.
Is that what it is? Okay, you're good. You're thinking this through. He obviously explained everything in detail. What I really liked was my stupid question about, what if a guy's a shortstop just to the left of second and he starts to run, what can he do? And it's obviously against the tenor of the rules, and the umpire will have some judgment of what to do about that. So kind of at the discretion of the umpire. So we might have another judgment ruling in place there, but maybe generally guys will stick to the tenor of the rule and stay where they're supposed to be, at least at the start of the pitch. And also, it's interesting to see, because you brought this up to me, was a left fielder, what if he can move to short right field, right? That's allowed by the rules, and kind of circumvent the rule and prevent the big left-handed hitter from hitting that ground ball single that's an out now, and it will still be an out. And he pointed out that the two outfielders could be disincentive and, might really hurt. So I thought those were good answers, and we'll see how it all plays out. But, just a brilliant guy, and showed you how he won 3 World Series when really nobody's winning 3 World Series now. It's going to be spread around, I think, but good for him.
Yeah, well, I think it's going to be fascinating next year when the left fielder plays in that spot, the short right field, for Daniel Vogelbach.
Yeah.
And then Daniel Vogelbach hits a ball to completely oddly empty space to see if he could circumvent 360 feet.
Good luck.
By the time somebody fields the ball. John, I think you hit on a key point we should think about heading into the offseason next season, which is every team already has started this, but even more in the offseason will go into their laboratory and try to figure out how to find the soft spots in the new rules. And I think we already saw, we had Theo for so long, and yet we never got into bigger bases, fewer pickoff moves. If you notice, stolen bases were way up in the minor leagues. The Yankees, a team we don't think of as a big running team, Anthony Volpe, Oswald Peraza, they had big stolen base numbers in the minor leagues. I think we're going to see that in next year, and I think everyone essentially is going to go into their lab and figure out what to do. That's for another day. Thanks for listening to the show, a podcast from the New York Post. Thank you to Anthony Beltramo for helping us through this, landing all the planes and producing our show. Thank you to the good folks here at MCM. Don't forget to go to the Yes app. We're up on Wednesday at noon every week. Subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a 5-star rating on Apple and Spotify. Follow us on Twitter. He's at John Heyman. I'm at Joel Sherman 1. And please join us every week on the show with Joel Sherman and John Heyman.